lastly, Your Honor, I have Caroline Schollaert's father, Mr. Pat Schollaert.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Thank you, sir. And if you would, for our record, state your name.
Patrick Schollaert.
Yes, sir. And who are you to Caroline, sir?
I was her father.
Yes, sir. And state.
Yes.
Yes, sir. You may read
Uh, excuse me. From an early age, Caroline was very much of an advocate for the underdog. Anyone being picked on, she felt a very deep obligation to defend, even at a very young age. This very caring nature blossomed throughout her short life, whether school, church, or the military. Caroline always looked out for anyone around her in need. This dedication developed further in high school as she decided to serve her country. I felt privileged as a father to help her navigate the various branches of our nation's armed forces. For many months, we examined, dismissed, and the different choices until the last option came up, the United States Coast Guard. Unique in their mission, the Coast Guard really mirrored her commitment to serve and protect. Its small size enabled her to stand out and make a difference, and she really did that. Whether on base or deployment, she made lasting impressions to really everybody she served with. She would fill extra duffel bags prior to a deployment, just filled with special coffee, snacks, candies, anything to share with the crew just to brighten their day, because ship life could be very difficult. She would even wear silly non-regulation socks. It was kind of a, nobody ever disciplined her. It always brought a smile to their face. She would always ask me to search for them. So it was a fun time for me to locate those for her. She had a memory for everybody's favorite coffee. And you had a cup waiting for you in the morning, whether you wanted it or not. Her smile was absolutely infectious. Her humor, awry and ornery. One of her quotes that's been immortalized now is "You're doing great." It was her way of encouraging anybody, particularly if they had a bad day. She would still tell them, "You're doing great." That quote has been permanently painted on one of the helicopters that she maintained and flew in. She was a very selfless, dedicated daughter, sister, aunt, fiance, and neighbor. I will personally miss our conversations. Simply, as a father, she would oftentimes vent a difficult day through me as a sounding board, I guess, or even just a special moment or a success. I really cherished knowing that she valued my thoughts on a variety of situations that she'd find herself in, from mechanical issues on the job to future goals and wishes. We were a very close-knit family. I miss her voice. Her laugh, her smile, that sense of humor. Are so many shared interests in family, cooking, traveling, simply even finding shark's teeth on a beach here locally. Those precious times have been brutally ripped from my life. The world has lost a very rare special person. All because of a cowardly criminal act of brutality, simply for gain by theft, when she would have been glad to help anyone in need, even the accused. As a father, I can't understand this kind of brutality. I can understand how anyone that can ask for assistance in the state of Florida can receive it, whether it's tutoring, counseling, free tuition to better yourself, and much more. What type of individual makes a lifelong choice to prefer being a thief, a thug, and frankly, a coward that preys on innocent society? My baby girl's gone forever. All I have are my memories and a granite headstone. I will never walk my daughter down the aisle. I will never know her as a mother. I'll never know her children. I will forever miss her embrace, her smile, her laughter, her just the love that she showered upon anybody that she knew. As I spend the last few years that I have slowly losing my battle with cancer, I'm forever denied my daughter's company. Your Honor, I really pray that you can get a glimpse of my daughter, the amazing young woman that she was, the irresponsible person who so brutally has taken her away from us all by an act of sheer cowardice, left to die in her driveway without a thought or a care for her life. Such an act deserves the maximum possible punishment. Anything less is an insult to Caroline's memory and a message to future criminals that crime does pay. I beg you to administer justice today and send a strong message to all who may consider this sort of life a crime. From a heartbroken father, I want to thank you in advance for the justice that is deserved today. Judge, I pray for you, and I pray for the soul of the guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Skinner?
No other witnesses. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Chipperfield?
And Your Honor, by agreement with the state, I'm introducing defense exhibits 1, 2, 3. 1 is Dr. Croft's report dated July 1st, 2022. Number 2 is the CV or Gordon Cow, who will call later today. And number 3 is Dr. Gordon Cow's psychological evaluation. He evaluated Mr. Parker on 10/12/22.
Okay.
Dr. Croft, could you state your full name, please?
Hang on, let me
Oh,
swear.
I'm sorry.
Dr. Croft, can you raise your right hand, please, sir?
Yes, Your Honor, and I'm having a little difficulty hearing Mr. Chipperfield. I can hear you fine.
Okay, he's going to talk right into the mic, and I am too, okay?
Okay, and I'm wearing my hearing aids today for the first time, so
All right. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, Your Honor.
All right, very well. Mr. Chipperfield?
Dr. Croft, could you tell us your full name, please?
My name is Harry Kropp. It's spelled K-R-O-P.
And what is your profession?
I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm the director of community behavioral services, which is a private practice of primarily forensic psychology with offices in Gainesville and Orange Park.
How long have you been licensed in the state of Florida?
Since 1971.
And have you testified many times in the courts throughout the state of Florida as a clinical and forensic psychologist?
I have, yes.
I know the court is familiar with your qualifications. I don't think I need to go any further. Dr. Kropp, in this case involving Tyree Parker, can you tell the court what you have done?
When you contacted me about Mr. Parker in terms of doing an evaluation, you asked me to evaluate him for competency. You also asked me to evaluate him primarily for a neuropsychological
Dr.
assessment.
Kropp, can you speak up a little bit, please?
Yes, ma'am. Let me see if my microphone is on all the way.
Yeah, maybe you can turn up your volume.
Okay. I was asked primarily to do a neuropsychological assessment and also to specifically address possible mitigation, in addition to being asked to do a competency evaluation. So to this purpose, I have interviewed Mr. Parker on 2 occasions. That was January 21st, 2022, and also October 19th, 2022. And then, and those interviews were done remotely, Your Honor. And then we also conducted a neuropsychological evaluation, and that was done in person at the jail on January 24th, 2022. In addition to the interview and the testing, I reviewed the defendant's, the police reports in this case. I reviewed extensive medical records. I reviewed his jail medical records, DCF records, school records, 911 calls, surveillance video. I also reviewed a report from Dr. Taub, who is, I see, present today as well. And then Mr. Chipperfield provided me with a very extensive chronology of the various and particularly significant events in Mr. Parker's life. And I believe Your Honor and the state probably have copies of those. So that's basically what I was asked to do, and what I did in terms of coming to my opinions and recommendations or conclusions.
And can you tell the court what psychological tests you administered?
I administered the abbreviated version of the Wechsler called the Wechsler Abbreviated Scale of Intelligence, which is a test that I usually use when I do a neuropsychological evaluation rather than doing the complete IQ test, because the research has shown that it correlates very well. And so I use it primarily for purposes of in the neuropsych assessment. I also administered the digit vigilance test, the subtest from the Wechsler Memory Scale 4, the verbal fluency test. Also the
Hang on, don't, Miss Dr. Crop, make sure when you talk right into your microphone, because if you turn away, we're going to miss what you said.
okay. So those are the primary tests that I gave. He was also administered the Wyatt, which is an achievement test. And then later I reviewed Dr. Taub's tests as well in his report.
All right. And when the tests were administered, is there any indication that he was not giving full effort?
No, there's 2 reasons I believe that he gave optimal effort. Number one is because on certain of the tests, particularly the memory test, he did fairly well relative to how he did on the other tests. And also in reviewing Dr. Taub's report, Dr. Taub administered the test of memory malingering, which is a specific test for malingering. And according to Dr. Taub's report, he felt that he was also giving forth optimal effort. The other thing is the results of the testing. First of all, my testing and Dr. Taub's testing in terms of the IQ were consistent. Also, the results of my testing were consistent with prior IQ tests that have been done throughout Mr. Parker's life. And then also the results of the neuropsych tests were very consistent with the behaviors and descriptions that have been given in various reports, in terms of school reports, in terms of therapy reports and so forth, and psychosocial assessments with regard to the deficits that Mr. Parker has demonstrated throughout his lifetime.
All right, I want to ask about your conclusions, but first, what was the score that he got on the intelligence test, the abbreviated test that you administered?
He had a, let's see, I believe it was an IQ of, a full-scale IQ of 66, if I'm not mistaken, full-scale IQ of 66. A verbal comprehension index, which is a subsection of 73, and a perceptual reasoning index of 64. So those scores would be in the mild range of intellectual disability.
All right. And now, just in general, what can you tell the court your conclusions based on the testing and the interviews and the record review that you did? What are your conclusions about Mr. Parker?
Well, based on the testing, we'll start there, and then the follow-up testing of Dr. Taub. I think it's appropriate to diagnose Mr. Parker with an intellectual disability, mild range of intellectual disability. I mean, I think that's been consistent throughout his academic career and so forth. He's been diagnosed in the past with mild mental retardation, which of course was the terminology used before it became intellectual disability. Achievement-wise, he was achieving no more than at the first or second percentile in all of the areas of achievement, and that has to do with math, reading, encoding, and so forth. So again, those scores are consistent with his academic achievement, or I should say lack of achievement. The interviews certainly reflected the immaturity that has been documented again throughout his, I don't know if I read any reports that didn't make reference to problems with attention, concentration, and describing him as immature. I did find that he was sufficiently, although he had cognitive deficits, and although, again, the emotional immaturity in and of itself was pretty evident, I did find him sufficiently able to assist in working with you, Mr. Chipperfield. So I did find him competent with regard to the, in terms of that particular psycho-legal issue. But overall, I found him to be both emotionally immature, intellectually immature, and then without really getting into great detail, I'm sure that the court recognizes what we now refer to as the adolescent brain, which indicates that individuals up to the age of 24 and 25, the most recent research shows, do not have fully developed frontal lobes. And the frontal lobe, we know, is responsible for attention, judgment, problem solving, impulse control, inhibition, and other types of what we refer to as executive function. So that's important to note, that not only at his age would his frontal lobes still not be fully developed, but we add on to the fact that the neuropsychological testing showed cognitive impairment in almost all areas that were tested. The only area that was not in the impaired range on the neuropsych testing was his short-term memory as well as long-term memory. So the neuropsych results combined with his brain immaturity certainly would reflect on some neurological impairment at the time of the that he engaged in this tragic incident. In terms of a specific understanding of why he, besides the general age immaturity in terms of the frontal lobe, I can't say for sure what the etiology was. We know that the mother was addicted to drugs. She was 14 years old at the time. I think she gave birth to Mr. Parker. So I don't know whether she was using drugs, but I know when she gave birth to his older sibling, she tested positive for drugs, as did the next baby. So that's one possibility in terms of the brain damage. The other is just the genetic, that there were some issues in terms of before he was born in terms of prenatal issues. We don't know that. I do have documentation that she was in a physical altercation when she was pregnant and got hit in the stomach and tried to cover that up. That was, when I say cover that up, I'm sorry, I mean cover her stomach up to try and prevent her from being hit or kicked, and that's in the DCF records. He also was in a very serious accident. I don't know the extent of any possible head injury, but when he was, I can't remember exactly, 15, something like that, maybe a little older, he was hit by a motorcycle while he was in a go-kart, and he was in the hospital for several weeks, suffered extensive physical injuries to various parts of his body. So again, that was an accident that he required rehab. And he also was in an accident as a passenger in a motor vehicle, I think when he was 17 or 18, wherein it was described that he had a brief loss of consciousness. But again, I can't, with any kind of reasonable degree of probability, I can't say what is the cause of his brain damage. I just know that that's what the testing shows, and the research shows in terms of the age. So that was one of my specific findings on the evaluation.
Let me go back and ask, you used the term mild mental retardation or mild intellectual disability a couple of times. That makes it sound to a normal person like maybe it's not that serious. Can you comment on that?
Well, the category of mild or moderate or severe is pretty much the same in terms of categorizing borderline or low average or average. There are IQ scores within a certain degree of variability or range. And again, Dr. Taub can certainly talk about this. But there are certain categories. So for example, between an IQ of 60 and 70 would be considered in the mild range, and then between 60 below 60 would be considered in the moderate range. So it's basically, we're talking about the lowest, maybe 7th or 8th percentile, especially where he scores of the population.
It's still then a serious disability.
It's been yes, I mean, that's why it's considered a disability and a disorder. And in his case, it has certainly limited, in addition to his environment, the fact that he has such poor cognitive functioning and poor neuropsychological functioning. It certainly has had a significant impact on his life.
All right, you talked about him being compromised by a low IQ and intellectual disability and brain damage as shown by the neuropsychological tests, and then his age with a brain that's still developing. Let me ask you now about trauma in his life based on the materials that you reviewed in your interviews. Did he suffer from adverse childhood experiences?
And based on the information available to me, I would say that he was exposed to, I believe, 9 out of the 10 adverse childhood experiences that are typically known certainly the research shows that the more adverse childhood experiences a person is exposed to, the higher the likelihood of mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and involvement in the criminal justice system. In Mr. Parker's case, clearly all 3 of those have been shown to be inaccurate in terms of prognosis or prediction.
And adverse childhood experiences, is the knowledge about that based on government studies? Was it initiated with a government study?
Originally, yes, and then there's been specific psychiatric studies as well. And just to name the specific without getting into explanation, unless you'd like me to, and I think in your chronology you discussed this, but there's a history of physical abuse, there's a history of emotional abuse, there's a history of sexual abuse by an uncle. And the physical abuse was by various relatives, actually. There's a history of drug addiction in the family. I mean, the mother suffered with cocaine addiction throughout her lifetime. the substance abuse in the family. I'm sorry, I already talked about drug addiction or substance abuse. There's neglect. There were mentions in DCF that the kids often were without food, were left alone. There's the criminal history in the family. The father, I know, and other relatives served significant prison terms. I believe the father pled to a manslaughter. So he was in prison much of Mr. Parker's younger life. I don't think he got out of prison until Mr. Parker was already 18 years old. And then there's domestic violence in the family. And then finally, and of great significance, was Mr. Parker not having any kind of really stable home environment. He was placed in foster care after he was sexually abused by an uncle and physically abused. He was placed in foster care, which had, there are concerns just about that as well. But I think he stayed in foster care until he was about 15, at which time his mother, to her credit, completed a DCF contract and he went back to live with her. And then unfortunately, again, trying to establish a relationship with her, she ended up having a stroke. And so that added to the stressors in his life in terms of trying to try to care for her.
And am I correct that of the 10 adverse childhood experiences that are recognized, the only one he lacked was a divorce in the family, and that's because his parents were never married?
That's correct. But I mean, you could always talk about separation. That would be included. In other words, it really is reflecting the lack of consistency in parenting in a child's home.
And with regard to the adverse childhood experiences, is it true that the more you suffer or experience, the greater the likelihood of damage?
Yes, frequency or the numbers of ACEs is considered the most important of predictive variables, and then the quality or severity also is important, but quantity is usually considered first and then the severity. And in his case, unfortunately, he had both. Again, 9 out of 10 of those that are considered significant. And then we had, and it's in your chronology in terms of not only abuse by the uncle, but there was, I'd say it was sadistic abuse. And again, along with the emotional abuse and the lack of support that he had from his parents, that was really very traumatic for him.
Putting all of these things together, would that have had an effect on his ability to control impulses, to see the consequences of his actions, to understand the motivations of others?
It would have. I mean, obviously, it doesn't make a person necessarily, the person's not necessarily insane in terms of not understanding right from wrong. But in terms of using judgment that maybe most people might have chosen a different path when the victim in this case caught him and held him at gunpoint. I mean, he did have some options, but again, because of what I've already described in terms of his impairment and lack of coping skills and his impaired capacity to think about the consequences, it appears from what he said and from what I've reviewed that this was a person who panicked, made a very, very bad choice. And obviously the consequences are pretty evident in terms of the victim's family, as well as Mr. Parker's family.
Thank you, Dr. Kropp. I don't have any further questions, but the state may have some.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Hello, Mr. Skinner.
Good to see you again. Doctor, you did some extensive testing on the defendant. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you did that testing in essence to determine um, generally speaking, whether or not he's intellectually disabled. Is that correct?
That as well as whether there was any neuropsychological impairment.
Yes, sir. And in doing those tests and the interviews with him, you also reviewed various items, correct? Like police reports, medical records, the jail medical records, correct?
Correct.
And one of those items you reviewed was a 911 call. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then another one was the surveillance video. Is that true, Dr. Prop?
Yes.
And what surveillance video did you review?
I believe it was, and I did this right at the beginning of the case, but I believe it was from maybe a home security. I don't remember specifically the basis, but it pretty much showed what happened.
Yes, sir. And you watched that in its entirety?
I believe I did. Again, it was about a year ago, but I believe when I first watched it, I tried watching it in its entirety.
Yes, sir. And so you're aware the defendant made decisions that night to burglarize a vehicle in the wee hours of the morning, approximately 5:30 a.m.
Yes, sir.
And he also made efforts to do it in a dark driveway, correct?
Yes.
And he walked up to a car that wasn't his and pulled on the handle. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you also saw when Caroline Schollaert approached him, well-dressed and ready to go to work that morning, she had a firearm drawn on
Yes.
him. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if you watch the whole thing and you listen to the entire 911 call, you saw that they engaged in an exchange for about three to 4 minutes. Is that correct, sir?
It was fairly brief, but yes, I remember that.
The court's going to review it, but you don't dispute that it's 3 or 4 minutes that they engaged in conversation, correct?
It's correct.
But yet you base your opinion that he has impulse control and or panicked over this 3 or 4 minute period, sir? Is that part of your opinion?
Yes, it was in terms of him feeling that since she had the gun, and he felt, I mean, again, I am certainly not making this as an excuse for him. But in terms of this guy's coping skills, he's limited in terms of, you know, what consequences he thinks about. And again, I'm not saying that what he did was impulsive. I'm saying that at some point that was the bad choice that he made, and that's a function of his again, impaired decision making. It's not only been in that situation, but in many other situations.
But then you heard on the 911 call that he was asking Ms. Schollaert to let him leave, right?
Yes. Yes, he knew he had that. I mean, yes, that's what he wanted to do.
And you heard him describe himself by the name of Lucifer, which wasn't even his name, correct?
Correct.
He made that decision himself, right? To give her a false name.
Sure.
And he described himself as living on the next street over. Did you hear that, sir, the 911 call?
I don't remember that, but
He
I don't
lied
dispute,
about that?
I don't dispute that. He lied. He lied when he first was interviewed by law enforcement. I'm not disputing that.
Well, let's talk about that. Did you watch that interview, sir?
I didn't watch it. I reviewed the police report.
Okay. Are you aware how long he maintained a lie with the law enforcement officers in the interview with Detective Abbott?
I couldn't tell that from the police reports.
Okay. Are you aware that it's 41 minutes long? He maintained a lie to Detective Abbott in his interview before he told the truth. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of the time, no, because I wasn't watching the video. I just reviewed the police report on that, and it didn't really, I don't think it talked about the time.
Okay. So are you saying that because he maintained his composure with the detective and a denial over 41 minutes, that had nothing to do with your opinion that he had or was struggling with impulse control, correct?
I still believe that based on the entirety of the evaluation and all of the reports, DCF and various other therapy reports, that it's been shown that he has impulse control problems.
All right. And some of the things you're testing for, like attention and judgment and problem solving, his executive functions, correct, sir?
That's correct.
Are you aware that his mother reports he worked as a broadband technician for TDS in St. John's County, Florida? Are you aware of that, sir?
I wasn't aware of that specific. I know that he had some menial jobs. I know that he worked digging holes. I know one of the jobs he had was basically in I think it was a warehouse, but he was involved in packaging and things like that. So, and I'm not trying to minimize those jobs, but most of the jobs he had did not involve a lot of cognitive ability.
But if someone works as a broadband technician, would that be something you'd be interested to know about his performance in that particular job?
I might be. I don't think I
Hang
could
on a
do it.
second, hang on a
on.
second, Dr. Krupp, hang on 1 minute.
We don't know what the broadband technician is, but it's possible to answer that question without knowing what that term means.
Well, Dr. Krupp, I think, can say that. The overall.
I'll ask it this way, doctor. Did you make any effort at all to talk to any employer of his to see how he does at work?
No, sir.
Does drug use, Dr. Croft, have anything to do with affecting one's intellectual abilities?
Drug use would certainly, depending on when a person starts, how much of drugs, what type of drugs, they all certainly would contribute to all kinds of possible cognitive impairment. And certainly it could also exacerbate any existing cognitive issues. So if he were using drugs at the time, that certainly would likely have exacerbated his already existing judgment and problem solving and so forth.
Yes, sir. Did you inquire of the defendant about what his drugs of choice were?
Yes.
And what'd he tell you?
Well, in terms of drugs of choice, I talked to him about that. I also talked to him about the drugs that he was using at the time in question. In terms of at the time in question, he claims that he was using fentanyl. He claims that he was using Molly, and he also mentioned meth and weed. So those were the drugs that he talked about using around the time of the offense. And those were the drugs that he was using leading up to during that time period leading up to the offense.
Yes, sir. And did he tell you that he, as he did in the PSI, that he also was using cocaine, meth, and Percocet? Did he report that to you?
I didn't know about the Percocet. He said fentanyl. So
How about the cocaine?
I thought I mentioned cocaine. I'm sorry.
All right. But so he admitted that to you as well?
He admitted using a lot of drugs. He indicated, and I'm not sure of the validity of that, but since he reported it, and I'm accepting some of the stuff that he reported, he indicated that he was really out of it and really wasn't totally in his right mind, as he said it when he did that. But again, I think that's something that he was hanging on to, not to justify necessarily, but for himself as maybe a rationalization as to why the behavior ended up the way it was.
Yes, doctor. But when you say you don't know if you should question the validity of that, you're not saying that the drug use wasn't there. He's admitted that. You agree to that, correct?
Yes, and he admitted that. And if he were using what he said he would, then that certainly would have been a contributor to his mental state at the time.
Okay. And you admitted earlier that drug use can affect one's intellectual abilities, correct?
Yes, it can affect any of us in terms of our cognitive abilities.
Okay. But in other words, it's not only these adverse child experiences that you described, it was also the current drug use that he chose to take at the time he was committing these crimes, right?
Well, yes and no. I agree with you that the drugs may have had an impact at the time in question, but I also indicated that the adverse childhood experiences have been shown to be highly correlated with individuals who end up abusing substances and having mental health issues and so forth. So in his case, I don't think I'm suggesting that you could single out anything of the stuff that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the environmental traumas that he experienced. I'm talking about his intellectual disability. I'm talking about the neurological impairment. I'm talking about his overall emotional immaturity. And then you add drugs to that combination. That's a pretty problematic state of mind.
Are you aware that when he reported his drug use to the Department of Corrections, he said he used all these drugs to help him stay up and or socialize? Are you aware of that?
He also, no, I wasn't aware he said that. I know that he told me when I asked him how fentanyl and so forth made him feel. He said, well, it made me feel good. It made me feel happy. And it made me feel like I could do things that I ordinarily couldn't do. So it pretty much put him in some type of euthymic or euphoric kind of state.
Did he mention to you anything about trying to stay up while on these drugs?
No,
So you don't know what he was taking drugs to stay up for, do you, doctor?
no.
Your Honor, I don't have anything further. Thank you.
Redirect.
Dr. Crop, you were asked whether you understood that his mother reported he was a broadband technician.
Yes,
Were you aware that he was helping dig trenches to lay cable?
that's what he told me. I think he said he did that in Georgia, and he said he was basically digging holes. So I wasn't sure when Mr. Skinner asked me that question, whether we were talking about the same job. He had told me about that.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
May Dr. Crop be excused? All right, Dr. Crop, thank you for your time and testimony. You're excused. You're welcome to hang around. If you do, please mute
No,
your microphone.
thank you, Your Honor.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
He probably doesn't remember me. Next witness.
I have a live witness, Darren Restos.
Please solemnly swear affirm that the testimony you give shall be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Name, sir, how are you?
Thank you.
Just pull your chair up and speak right into the microphone. Appreciate it.
Mr. Restos, could you tell us your full name?
My name is Darren Respis Senior,
Can you spit?
Respess.
And do you live here in Jacksonville?
I do.
How are you related to Tyree Parker?
I am Tyree Parker's grandfather.
And are you his mother's father?
I am.
So you're his maternal grandfather.
I am.
And have you known him since the day he was born?
I have.
Did you have contact with him as he was growing up?
I had contact spurts with him as he was growing up. Yes.
All right. And can you tell the court a little bit about his childhood and how rough it was for him?
It's actually been covered pretty well today. He has had a very rough childhood, unstable. There are numerous occasions where I was called out to the place that he and his mother and his father were staying because of violence, and he was very much aware of that violence. Sometimes he was actually a part of it, and had to be removed from the situation.
And was the violence between his biological father and your daughter?
Yes, in most cases, yes.
And am I correct that your daughter was 14 years old when she gave birth to Tyree?
That's correct.
And am I also correct that the father, the biological father, was in and out of jail and then finally went to prison when Tyree was about 7 years old?
He was in and out of jail, yes, and I'm not exactly sure of the age of Tyree during the time that his father was incarcerated.
But his father went to prison for a manslaughter.
That's correct.
And did you have further contact with Tyree after when he was in elementary school and then in middle school?
During the entire process, we've had spurts of contact. While he was in DCF custody, he would call me. We would have conversations, but they were often brief. But as far as he and I having a lot of physical contact, that did not happen. Before his father was incarcerated, he would come with me. We would go fishing with him and his cousins and things like that. But after those times, we had very little physical contact together.
And are you aware that DCF took him away from his mother
Yes,
and then took him away from his grandmother,
yes,
and then he was placed in foster care?
that's correct.
What is your perception of his intellectual abilities on your contacts with him?
He has always been slower than the other children his age and comparable to his age. He was very distant. He seemed shut off quite a bit. He would disassociate himself with the group because a lot of times he gave me the impression that he did not understand fully what was going on. When he was engaged and did not understand or did not comprehend, he made very irrational choices, things that would seem obvious. Well, don't do this or don't do that. He chose to do things that we hadn't even considered. We had one incident where we had a barbecue, or we were having a family barbecue, and he went into the house and he went into a closet and just sat in the closet as if he had, as if something was wrong. And when we talked to him about it, there was nothing wrong. It's just that he didn't know what else to do.
And did his intellectual abilities affect his ability to find work?
Yes, quite often he would ask me if I could take him out, and give him some work. At one point in time, I owned a lawn service and a tree service. And because he couldn't stay focused long enough to complete a task sufficiently, I would not allow him to come out and go with me, handling the tools and the mowers and things such as that nature.
And has he at times asked you for money to help support himself?
Yes, he would call me from time to time, but he was very respectful. He would not ask me for great sums of money, such as my other children would, but he would always ask for what it took just to get him by from one situation to a next.
And has he always been respectful towards you and your wife?
He has indeed always been respectful toward me, my wife, even his brothers and sisters, when they would have, when I say brothers and sisters, I mean my other children, cousins, nephews. He would always be on the submissive end of whatever the conflict was.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Cross-examination.
No, Your Honor, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down. Be careful of that step there.
Thank you.
Sure, on Zoom, I think I have Diana Reston.
Okay, yep. All right, Ms. Respis, Diana, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, and I would normally just call you Ms. Respis, but there's two of them, so I wanted to make sure I was let you know we were calling you as a witness now. Can you raise your right hand for me, please? Do you
Sorry.
solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chipperfield?
Ms. Respis, would you tell us your full name, please?
Diana Louise Respis,
Would you spell your last name?
Respess.
And do you live here in Jacksonville or are you out of state?
No, I'm currently in California.
All right, and how are you related to Tyree Parker?
Me and his mother shares the same father.
All right, and did you get to know him when he was young and continue to know him throughout his life?
Yes, sir. I was really young when him and Janetta moved into my father's house, and then bits and pieces after that.
Okay, can you tell he's here for sentencing today. He's pled guilty to a second-degree murder and an armed burglary. And the judge has to sentence him. Can you tell the judge what you would like to say about Tyree?
In terms of what, like,
Well,
in
your
terms of,
observations of him, what kind of person has he been throughout his life? What kinds of problems has he had? What's his personality like?
okay, of course. So bits and pieces of him growing up and me being around, it was a lot of trauma for him. I would definitely say that. I was really young, so it wasn't like all the way noticeable, but I know a special bus did come to the house to pick him up from home, from his grandmother's Becky house, which is his uncle's mother. And there was a lot of abuse, and the house was really almost condemnable. It wasn't really supposed to be lived in. I think after a while, the house did get condemned. It was a lot of abuse from his uncle, physically and verbally in the house. Obviously couldn't do anything about the situation, but I did witness and was present to a lot of the altercations that he had to experience during the younger days. This was, I believe, from elementary to middle school, bits and pieces that I was around to see certain things like that. As he got older, I know he tried to get a job. He tried to work. The comprehension obviously is not 100% there, but I know he did at least try. I would try with him to see if we can get him jobs. He tried for office jobs. I would tell him about warehouse jobs. And also, like my father said, he will ask for money politely, but he wouldn't ask for a lot. He would ask me for $1 here. I think he never asked me for more than $10 to send him on Cash App. So it was different. It was extremely hard. I wish I could have helped better.
When he was looking for jobs, you said you helped him. Would you help him fill out applications for the jobs?
I would tell him how to. I never helped him fill out the actual application, but I would definitely encourage him and tell him other places that's hiring. I did tell him about websites, and I've also took him to an interview. I believe we were out JTB. It was an office job he was trying to get there. I encouraged him. I did definitely take him to the interview, bought him a suit and helped him. Not brand new, obviously it was a thrift store, but I did help him to the best of my knowledge to try to get those type of jobs. Whatever he wanted, I tried to encourage him with it.
And did you have the feeling that he really did want to work?
I did have the feeling that he did. No offense, I just didn't think, I preferred and wanted him to go to a warehouse job out by Hechter Drive or something. I know a lot of those places was hiring, and considering his age as a young man, I felt that those would be more career-based or an easier job to get when you're young and impressionable, so to say, versus an office job out JTB, if you understand that.
And did you think he was better capable of doing a warehouse job than an office job?
Yeah, I just felt like it would be more beneficial as well. I can't remember the exact kind of job, but I did take him to the interview and waited till he came out that day. But I just felt like a warehouse job. I forgot what the places were called. I just felt like they would be more beneficial for him.
All right, thank you, Ms. Respis.
Mm-hmm. Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Ms. Respis.
Hi.
Just real briefly, when's the last contact you had with Mr. Parker?
I think during the interview, physical contact, face to face was during the interview and the jobs thing, but then we were talking and texting over the phone.
Okay, but when you were last engaging with him about these jobs, is that last summer, or the previous summer before this incident, or was it 2 years ago? Approximately, when was it?
I believe it was at least a year before the incident, at minimum, I believe. I don't think it was longer than that.
Okay, and then you moved to California at that time?
I've been in California since June of this year.
Okay, so you were here trying to help him approximately 1 year before this incident date of August 3rd, 2021.
I believe so. I believe so, yes.
Okay, during that year, after you were trying to help him get a job, did you continue that, or did you just throw your hands up with it?
I definitely didn't throw my hands up with it. It was based on how he contacted me. So just from inspiration from me, if a person reaches out for help, you engage and you help. So that's all that was. If he didn't reach out, I guess that's just how that went. But if he reached out, I made it my business to help as much as I can.
Yes, ma'am. During that year prior to this incident, did you ever know him to lock down and get a job?
I remember he had a job before, but the from 18 to like this current moment, I'm not sure of exactly everywhere he was working on that. I just know if he reached out, I reached back. That's it.
Okay, so your testimony is you don't think he ever had any employment from age
I
18?
don't know the full extent or where he was working at the time. So that knowledge I don't have. But I know he had worked before, but what he was doing, like they were saying something about a broadband. I have no knowledge of that. I don't know.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yes. Redirect. Okay, Ms. Respis, thank you for your time and testimony. If you'd like to hang around, you're most welcome to. All I'd ask you to do is just mute your microphone.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Chipperfield?
Brittany Respis on Zoom.
Okay. Ms. Respis, can you hear me? Miss Brittany Respis? Just unmute your mic, please, ma'am.
Yes, Judge, I can hear you.
Okay, raise your right hand for me, please. Do you solemnly
Yes, ma'am.
swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Chipperfield?
Ms. Respis, could you tell us your full name?
My name is Brittany Latrice Respis.
And where do you live?
I live currently now in Wyoming, Michigan.
How are you related to Tyree Parker?
That is my blood nephew. I am the sister of his mother.
All right. And have you known him throughout his whole life?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us your impressions of Tyree's mental abilities?
I feel like my nephew, he thinks on the level as like a 14-year-old, if that. And that's in all around, in my personal opinion. He acts and thinks of a child. I have a 12-year-old now that could outthink my nephew.
And has he been that way as long as you have known him?
Yes, sir, he has.
Can you tell us why you feel that way? I mean, what have you observed that makes you feel like he thinks like a 14-year-old?
The way he reacts to any kind of communication. Anytime that you're speaking with a child, you can clearly tell that it's a child just by the level of the mentality that person has. And when speaking with him, you can tell that he has the mental capacity of a child and not of an adult.
Did you feel like he had a good heart?
I know my nephew has a wonderful heart.
Has he always been kind and respectful to you?
He has. He was always really a shy kid and a sweet kid. You know, he in my opinion, to put it in words where you could understand, if you've ever seen a dog that has been abused, that is how he reacted in most cases. He always acted like you know, he was scared or something, you like you were fixing to hit him or something. And he was really, really jittery, you know, never quite normal.
Okay. And you know the experiences that he went through as he was growing up, I guess.
Yes, sir, I do.
Did he have a rough childhood?
Yes, sir. He had an unimaginable childhood, in my opinion. It's just something that you can't even fathom, to be honest with you. I would wish that life on no one. And I'm so sorry that this has happened to him.
Okay. All right, thank you, Ms. Rasmus.
Yes, sir.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Ms. Respis.
Good afternoon.
When did you move to Michigan, ma'am?
I have been living in Michigan for 3 years, going on 3 years now.
And you've been there ever since you moved?
Yes, sir. I visit home on occasion, you know, holidays and things like that to see the family.
Okay. So you last saw Mr. Parker in person, either on a visit or consistently 3 years ago, working backwards. Is that correct?
No, sir. I've seen him on, I would say about 2 years ago on my visit when I came for holidays.
Okay, that was one visit.
Yes, sir. That was one visit.
All right. And then prior to that, you saw him 3 years ago when you were living here, working backwards.
That's correct.
All right. So you've seen him once in 3 years?
Yes, sir.
All right. How often do you communicate with him now?
I talk to him all the time. Right now, as we speak, actually, I have minutes on the phone for him so I can be in contact with him. But for some reason, I wasn't able to get verified yet. So I wasn't able to get that communication all the way through yet, but I'm doing everything in my power to be able to talk to him.
Sure. When you were here 3 years ago backwards, how often would you see him then?
Very rarely, very rarely.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Ms. Respos, thank you for your time and testimony. You're welcome to stick around if you like, but if you do so, would you please mute your microphone in case any background noise?
Yes, ma'am. And if it's not too much to ask, I just would like to apologize for the life of this woman that has been lost. I just felt the need to say that.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chipperfield?
I think I have a witness who came in after it already started. May I just ask if she's here?
Sure, of course.
Jonathan Restos, did you want to testify? Yes. And I call Jonathan Restos.
Very well.
Please raise your right hand as you can. You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes.
Chipperfield?
Ma'am, could you tell us your full name?
Janetta Lachelle Respis.
And is your first name Johniter?
Correct.
And your middle name is what?
Lachelle, Lashall.
Thank you, ma'am. And do you live here in Jacksonville?
Yes, sir.
And how old are you?
I'm 38.
And are you Tyree Parker's biological mother?
Correct.
Ms. Respis, we haven't had a chance to talk too much. this is the first time I've met you. Did you have Tyree when you were 14 years old?
Say it one more time.
Did you have Tyree Parker when you were 14 years old?
Yes.
Right. And did he live with you when he was a baby?
Yes.
Did there come a time, and who was his father?
Tyree, his name is Willie Parker, is his father.
And did he ever really live with you?
No, and not really. I used to live with his grandma. I've been in and out of different houses. I have my own house. I'd be in somebody else. I'd be at my dad's house. I never really had my own for a while. And then until right before I started, right before I had my stroke, I started having my own place. And then, and that was over there on the north side.
And let me go back in time now. At some point when Tyree was about 6 or 7 years old, did DCF take him away from you?
Yes.
Right. And he was placed with his grandmother?
Yeah, yes.
And were you having trouble taking care of your children because of a drug problem?
Yes. When his father went to prison, I got a little different for my life and my brain. So I started doing different stuff
Okay.
for a while.
All right. And then when he went with his grandmother, was that Willie Parker's grandmother?
Say it again.
When Tyree was taken from you and went to his grandmother, was that Willie Parker's mother that he went to?
Yeah, Willie Parker is his father.
Right.
Yes, and his grandma is he's a Parker too. What's the name? Parker.
Is it Rebecca?
Yes.
Okay. And he lived with her for a while then.
Yes.
And did DCF take him away from her also?
Yes.
And then did he go into foster care?
Yes.
Let me ask you, at some point after he got out of foster care, did he come live with you again?
Yes. I had to fight for my son.
Okay. And you went through a DCF plan and
Yes.
finished it, and they gave him back.
And get myself right. Yes.
And shortly after you got him back, did you have a stroke?
Yes.
All right. Do you remember what year that was?
That was about, I thought it was a couple of years, but nodding at, it was on the 17th. I mean, on the, at least 5 years ago, I'm gonna say that. On the, no, it was on the 4 years.
Well, let me ask it this way. Do you remember how old Tyree was when you had your stroke?
Yes, he was, I think 17
Okay.
or either 17 or 16. Either way it go, I couldn't keep him with school no more. So I asked my auntie to see what I need to do to keep him in school. And so we tried to go to the school place and take him out of school so he can be homeschooled, because I had no way to pick him up to school. And that was my job.
Who was going to homeschool him?
Like what it is, they have a whole school, but the one that's, honestly, now I'm thinking about it, I was thinking in my brain for some reason, I thought he could go to them schools that's not a big school, but it's like US, what's the,
Like a smaller school?
it's downtown. They got one downtown. What's it called? No, not that one either.
That's okay, Ms. Respis. You don't have to remember that. Let me
Is-
ask you this. Has your son always respected you?
Yes, he wouldn't say certain words like bitch or hoe, but he would be, excuse me, but he'd be like, be And I'd be like, well, whatever.
So he wouldn't swear in front of you? Is that-
No, no, sir.
And do you still love your son?
Yes, so much.
Thank you, ma'am. That's all I had.
Cross-examination.
No, thank you. Your
Thank you,
Honor.
Mr. Skinner. All right, ma'am, you can step down. Be really careful stepping down. Mr. Chipperfield?
I call Gordon Howe on Zoom.
Hey, Dr. Taub, if you'd unmute your microphone, please. Can you say something?
Yes, Your Honor. Can you hear me
All right.
okay?
No, I can't. Can you turn up the volume or speak closer to the microphone?
Oh, boy.
All right, you want to give it a try?
I am trying, Your Honor. I am
Oh, that
making.
sounds much better.
Okay.
All right, just stay right there where you can speak it right into the microphone. Can you raise your right hand, please?
Yes, Your Honor.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Very well. Mr. Chipperfield?
Dr. Taub, could you tell us your full name?
1 second. I'm having a little bit of trouble with my screen after adjusting the microphone. 1 moment, please. Okay. Yes, my name is Dr. Gordon Edward Taub.
Could you spell your last name, please?
T as in Tom, A-U-B as in boy.
And what is your profession, sir?
I'm a licensed psychologist. I have a private practice in forensic psychology. I'm also a professor at the University of Central Florida. Been a professor at the university since 1999.
And how long have you been licensed in the state of Florida?
I've been licensed, I'm a licensed school psychologist and a licensed psychologist. And I believe I started, first license was, I believe, in 1996.
All right. And can you tell the court your educational background?
Sure. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from Florida International University, an EDS in school psychology from Florida International University, and a PhD from the University of Florida.
And what is the nature of most of your practice now? What kind of work do you do for the most part?
Other than working at the university, I train students in the administration, scoring, and interpretation of intelligence tests, ethics, child development, etc. I also do work within the area of intelligence. I evaluate how well intelligence tests measure intelligence specifically. 1 second, my screen just messed up. 1 second, I'm sorry.
We can see you really well.
Well, okay, I'm trying to see, I get my screen so I can see Mr. Chipperfield, because
Well,
I can't. Oh, well.
I'm
Okay,
kind of
that's what I have.
I'm kind of far away from the camera, but we can see you. Which
I'm
is
better. Okay,
important.
thank you. Thank you.
And are you involved in the development of IQ tests as well?
Yes, my research has contributed, which specifically, as I said, is on the measurement and structure of intelligence, which means that I evaluate how well intelligence tests measure what we call the construct of intelligence. And I do data analyses and see how well they are measuring the construct. And I make recommendations to improve the measurement of intelligence with the tests during their next revision. And this has been used by the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, 5th edition. My research with colleagues basically formed the foundation, a literal blueprint for the development of that test. My research also contributed to the redevelopment of the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for adults 4. And that was due to my research on the prior edition, the third edition.
All right,
And I've
Dr. Calvin.
also the Woodcock-Johnson test of cognitive abilities as well.
All right,
And
I
also
have submitted
Woodcock-
your CV as an exhibit, so I'm not going to go through all your publications and things. But I will ask you this, in addition to helping develop IQ tests, do you administer them and score them?
Yes, I've administered and scored over 1,000 tests. I don't know how much over 1,000, could be a couple thousand, I don't know. I've also trained as a national trainer on intelligence tests and achievement tests. I've trained thousands and thousands of practitioners, both within the United States and internationally.
All right, in this case, my office hired you to let us know whether Tyree Parker met the criteria for being intellectually disabled within the state of Florida. Is that something that you have done before?
Yes, I have.
And in this case, can you tell us how you set out to determine whether he met the criteria for intellectual disability?
Sure. The state of Florida has 3 prongs that an individual needs to meet in order to be eligible or to meet the criteria for intellectual disability. And the first prong is IQ score that is 2 or more standard deviations below the mean of the instrument. Prong 2 is accompanying adaptive behavior deficits. And the third prong is onset of the disability prior to age 18.
All right, let me take those in order then. Did you determine whether he has an IQ that is 2 standard deviations from the mean on the instrument?
Yes, I administered the WACE-4, which is approved by DCF along with the Binet 1 and 2 tests that we're able to use within the court system. It measures 5 factors of intelligence, and it is currently the state of the art for measuring adult intelligence. And I administered that to him on October the 12th, 2022.
All right, and can you explain the results of that test?
Yes, the test provides, as I said, it measures several different areas or factors of intelligence. And those individual factors combine into what we call a full-scale IQ score. And in order to make the determination of an intellectual disability, we have to look at the full-scale IQ score. And he earned a full-scale IQ score of 65, which is at the first percentile.
And when you say it's at the first percentile, what does that mean?
That means he scored as high or higher than 1 out of 100 individuals. So we're looking at the low end of the instrument. It's consistent with people who have an intellectual disability, and it's reflected in their performance on the instrument.
All right, and is that in the mild range of intellectual disability?
Yes, it is.
And you probably heard me ask Dr. Kropp earlier, when we say mild, it makes it sound like it's not important or it's not serious. Is that the case?
No, it is serious, and it affects all areas of our life. I think to kind of provide somewhat of a framework of what intelligence is would be helpful. So
Go ahead and do that.
When we're looking at intelligence, we're looking at something called the verbal ability, which is our acquired knowledge, which are things like our telephone number, knowing not to cross a street. If I was to say what's 1 + 1, we instantly know it's 2. So it requires very little thought because it's so well known to us. Another area is processing speed, which is how fast we're able to process information, how fast our brain is able to take in new information and transfer it into what we have, which is called working memory, which is holding memory within your mind and twisting it and manipulating it in some way. And then we take that information, we put it into our long-term memory for retrieval later. And so the example I used with students was the 1 + 1 regarding our verbal ability. The other one I used to help with long-term retrieval, long-term memory, kind of our file cabinet, is what's 8 × 6. And we don't do it as quickly. We're going back into our mind to remember this. The other area is fluid reasoning. If we look at a continuum of information and things that we know very well, and on the other side, information or experiences that we have not had or have only had a very small portion of experience to, that's what fluid reasoning is. It's on that far side where we're not having exposure to an event or a problem. And that's what we're really looking at. We're starting to get into our problem solving in addition to working memory and long-term retrieval and processing speed.
All right, so we got into that because of the question about the significance of mild
Yes,
intellectual
so,
disability.
yes. So when you think about acquiring knowledge that is important for us to get by in everyday life, our ability to process information, our ability to hold information in our mind and transpose it, and to problem solve. When someone's impaired in these areas, it's very impactful. I think kind of an analogy might be Forrest Gump. And, you know, Forrest Gump, he just didn't pick up on things. And people could make fun of him. He doesn't get things. You don't pick up information from observation easily. You need a lot of repetition, bunch of jokes. In younger ages within schools, we explain what an intellectual disability is as kind of sitting down at a dinner. And for most of us, we'd sit down at dinner and we're going to have, if you go for a nice dinner, you're going to have an appetizer, then you're going to have a salad, then you're going to have an entree, and you have a starch and a vegetable, and then after that, dessert. And if you look at that, it's kind of education where we're getting, you know, science and language arts and various subjects being taught to us and presented. When you look at somebody with an intellectual disability, they're just provided the entree in school. So there's a special program for them. And so they're needing a lot of repetition. So a typical developing individual will need about 10 to 12 repetitions. Someone who's gifted, which is actually the other side of an intellectual disability, will only need like maybe 1 or 2 repetitions because they get it and then they get the next thing. And that's how they're able to move faster through the educational system. They don't need as much repetition. They're building on prior knowledge. On the other end, someone who is intellectually disabled, they don't have that prior foundation, that prior knowledge. So they're needing a lot of repetition in order to gain a little bit of information. So when you're looking at that in the real world, as long as somebody's engaged in something that's very, very repetitive, such as going to a grocery store or purchasing something at McDonald's, where you've done that time and time again, we're going to function fine as an intellectually disabled person. When we're engaged in something that's more complex, that's when we're going to see the effect, which is because it's requiring problem solving and reasoning and the ability to process information like this quickly. And that's when the impairment starts. So you can't tell that somebody's necessarily intellectually disabled by speaking with them. But once they're having to engage in some kind of complex behavior, that's where they fall apart and have a lot of difficulty doing it. I think an example, going back to that Forrest Gump, there was a scene where he's on a shrimp boat. He hardly knows how to drive and he's taking it out and everybody else is coming into the port. He doesn't realize there's a storm coming. He just doesn't get it by looking at the observations. And when we look at Forrest Gump, you know, look at him living with his mom, having a stable relationship. And then we look at Mr. Parker with the kind of family background in life that he has had and that kind of impairment. The way that they experience life and whether they experience life is much different. And the way that they process experience is much different. Again, it goes back to that, what have they overlearned? What are their experiences that they have overlearned? And I think that's what has happened in this case with Mr. Parker, is he's had such a detrimental life, such an abusive life, and unstable life, that he has not had the social support that a lot of other folks do have. And so that's why we're saying someone that is so impaired and has had interactions with the criminal justice system and is also result of what Dr. Kropp described, as well as with his difficult time with the trauma and in school, and so interpersonal relationships as well.
Right. Let me ask you, Dr. Taub, the result that you got of the full scale IQ of 65, do you consider that to be valid?
Yes, I do. I gave a test, which is a test of malingering, which was a functional administration to see his ability to cooperate with me, and also show that he had good on task behavior, which he did. Also, during the administration of my test of the Wechsler scale, we saw that he took concern about, was engaged in his performance, demonstrated frustration when he didn't get items correct, used verbal mediation, meaning speaking to himself, to help him perform on subtests that are very difficult. And the type of scatter that we see in his performance, which is a 13-point difference across the areas of intelligence, provides support that it was a valid administration.
All right, the second prong you said in the state of Florida for intellectual disability is adaptive deficits. Can you explain how you tested for those?
Yes, I administered the ABIS-3, which is a well-respected standardized test of adaptive behavior. I administered it to his girlfriend, Alicia Price, who she has known him for 3 years. They lived together for a year. And it was my opinion, not only did she exceed minimum requirements to be a respondent for the test, but that she knew him very, very well. And her scores on that test that she provided do support that as well. There's 3 broad areas that we can look at for a deficit in adaptive behavior in the diagnosis of an intellectual disability, which are conceptual, social, and practical. And in the social domain, he scored higher than 2 standard deviations below the mean, meaning that we couldn't look at that score in that area to say he's intellectually disabled, because he was scoring in a low average range. On 2 other areas, which is conceptual and social, conceptual and practical, he scored in both of those areas 2 standard deviations below the mean. And that meets the criteria for an intellectual disability. You just have to meet 2 standard deviations below the mean in one of the 3 areas. And he was 2 standard deviations below the mean in 2 areas.
All right, and the third criteria for intellectual disability in the state of Florida is onset. What is it, before the age of 16, 15?
Yes, onset before the age of 18.
18, okay.
And so,
and did you determine that by reviewing the chronology that was compiled from DCF records, school records, hospital records, and psychological treatment records?
I did. What was most significant to me are the school records. The schools have a different criteria to identify somebody as intellectually disabled than the court does. It's actually a bit more stringent. So within the school system, they require observations, they require social history, in addition to the adaptive behavior and the IQ test, and interview with the parent. So he was identified in, I believe it was his 3rd time in kindergarten. He was evaluated for an intellectual disability at the age of 9, when he was in kindergarten again, finishing up his 3rd year. So the school system identified him as what was called educationally mentally handicapped, which is analogous to an intellectual disability today. So that established onset prior to the age of 18. In addition, the school systems have to do a reevaluation every 3 years there were several reevaluations. In fact, one of them took place very close to each other. And in each one of these reevaluations, the school staff and school psychologists continued to identify him as intellectually disabled and eligible for programs for students with an intellectual disability. And he was identified as being in a self-contained classroom, which is similar to dinner, where you're just given the entree to try to assist him in acquiring knowledge. And he did not acquire very much academic achievement. He didn't progress well academically. That could be due to his social background, not having support. Oftentimes parents will help kids with their homework, especially when you're intellectually disabled. You do need a lot of supports. So it does not appear that he had those supports at home from his mother's testimony and from the chronology that you provided to me. And so he was just going to school, maybe after being abused, and sitting in the classroom. So he had his achievement scores were very, very low. So we can actually see a difference between achievement scores and an IQ test. So because somebody's intellectually disabled does not mean they have to score in the intellectually disabled range in academic achievement. They could actually score much higher, which would not be unexpected because they're only associated about 50% with each other. So to see this little depressed scores in academic achievement just is a reflection of his environment and his inability to acquire knowledge quickly, or even at a pace that we would expect somebody that is intellectually disabled.
All right, you have explained to me outside of court about consistent across all of your testing was a low processing speed. Can you explain to the court the significance of that as it might relate to a crime where he does something that's impulsive?
Well, I think first to just kind of relate it to a practical situation. I was sitting here listening to Dr. Kropp and other people testify. And so I'm taking that information in and I'm trying to remember it. And it's my processing speed that assists me in remembering that information. So if I'm not able to store it quickly, I'm going to lose it. So the ability to process information fast assists us in decision-making. When our processing speed is impaired, it's very hard to make decisions quickly, because what we're having to do is rely on our past experiences, especially when you talk about the crime. I assume that no one expected to, or Mr. Parker did not expect to have somebody pull a gun, which was appropriate for Ms. Schollaert's training. And I'd like to, when her dad was testifying, it broke my heart. This is very tragic and a very unfortunate situation. And so when he saw the gun, he had no experience with somebody pulling a gun on him while he's opening up a car door, I would assume, and having the gun pointed at him. So because he didn't have the prior experience with this situation, we're really on that end of fluid reasoning, where it's an experience that is outside of that continuum of normal day-to-day activities and experiences. It's very novel. And so your processing speed is then just going to go into what we call our crystallized intelligence, or that overlearning that I first talked about, which is the 1 + 1 = 2. And with his environment, what he's overlearned is a lot of violence. And so he seems to have, I can't say for sure, but seems to have defaulted into that more culturally consistent reaction within the environment he was raised, which is fear and abuse and protecting yourself.
Well, thank you, Dr. Taub. That's all I have.
Cross-examination?
Good afternoon, doctor.
Good afternoon.
You met with Tyree Parker on October 21st of 2022.
October 12th, I believe, yes.
October 12th, yes, sir. Is that the only time you met with him?
Yes, it is.
Is that the first time you met him? that
Yes,
the
sir.
first time you met him?
Yes, sir.
So you didn't speak to him either on a Polycom or at a jail conference or a Zoom call, anything like that, correct?
No, I did not.
So the very first time that you engaged him whatsoever was at the jail on October 12th of 2022, right?
Yes, sir.
How long did you spend with him?
I believe around 3 hours.
And how many visits after your initial visit did you spend with Mr. Parker?
As I said, I just met with him one time.
All right. So the entire amount of data that you gleaned from him came from that one meeting, correct?
Yes, it is.
And the only test with respect to the three criteria, I guess the three factors that you alluded to, that you gave him was the WAIS 4 regarding the IQ and factor number 1, WAIS, the WAIS 4. Is that correct?
No, it's not. There were two prongs that one has to meet as an adult. One of them is the IQ test, as you mentioned, and the other one is the adaptive. Well, I didn't give him the adaptive behavior. I gave him the TOM as a measurement of malingering.
But the TOM is just determining whether he's malingering and putting forth his best effort, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and it's not unusual for us to psychologists to meet with somebody one time and make a determination of what their intelligence is. What's important for us to do is to establish rapport and to ensure that we're getting a best effort from the examinee before moving on to giving the IQ test. And while we're administering the test, to continue to evaluate the individual's performance to ensure that they are putting forth their best effort.
To be clear, however, the TOM test doesn't play into any scored numbers to make your determination. Is that true?
It's true. The TOM in forensic practice, especially in Florida, is often used as a test of malingering. We have a best practice that we have to follow as psychologists. And the guidelines are that we can only use tests that have been standardized, meaning when the test is when the data for the scoring of the test is collected, that the individual who I am administering it to was represented in that initial sample where the data was collected. And that didn't happen with the TOM. So it is a function.
Yes, sir. So to be clear, the TOM test that you're examining Mr. Parker with only is eliminating the issue of whether he's putting forth his best effort.
It's not, no, it's not to eliminate it. It's to see if they are applying themselves. And so it's either confirming it or disconfirming.
It has nothing to do with the numbers that you came up with in the WAIS 4 examination, right?
No, only it gave me confidence that he was putting forth effort and the administration was valid.
So therefore, the only test that you made this determination during this one visit over this 3-hour time period was the WAIS 4, right?
Yes, that we have a individual who has a intellectual disability. So I used the intelligence test to determine if he does meet the first prong of present day intellectual disability.
Right. Have you seen the same person take a WAIS 4 test and receive a different score on the second attempt?
Yeah, so, you know, our scores are imperfect instruments. So just like, you know, we look at, you know, predictions for elections, and there's a margin of error of 3 or 4 points. When we have our blood taken and it's analyzed, there's a margin of error. And there's also a margin of error in intelligence tests. So when we look at Mr. Parker's IQ score, the observed score is 65. We have to account for the error within the test. So his score is really within a range. We use 65, but it is within a range. And we do expect that there will be variability. And that's due to the unreliability of individual items. So for example, you can't give one item on an IQ test and determine if somebody's gifted or intellectually disabled. And possibly just watching TV and learning about Martin Luther King could have an impact on somebody answering a question about Martin Luther King the next day. So we do expect to have variability within IQ test scores.
So if the IQ test that you give the Waves 4 is imperfect, your opinion is imperfect as well, right?
No, the instrument does have a degree of imperfection, which we account for, which is called the standard error of measurement.
You do agree that the 4 categories within the Weschler Adult Intelligence Scale test are verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, working memory, and processing speed, right?
Yes, they are.
And those 4 scores on this particular defendant, with respect to verbal comprehension, he was in the 2nd percentile rank. With respect to his perceptual reasoning, he was in the 5th percentile rank. Working memory, he was in the 4th percentile rank, right?
Yes. Yeah,
But your overall full scale, because of his processing speed percentile rank of 1, ended up being in the 1% on the full scale.
Yeah, that's a misunderstanding that people have about intelligence tests. They're not.
I'm not asking if there's a misunderstanding. I'm just asking you if that's the score.
Would you please repeat the question, because maybe I misunderstood it? No,
I'm just asking you if those scores are correct, doctor.
These scores are correct, but his
Okay.
score of 65 is not due to his processing speed. That's just the lowest score that he earned.
Yes, sir. Now, the second test in the deficits in adaptive functioning, you administered a test not to Mr. Parker, right? You administered a test to his girlfriend who he'd been living with.
Dating and living with, yes.
And that was Miss Alicia Pierce.
Yes, sir.
And you agree that the information she provided you in that test also is imperfect. You agree with that?
Also is
Imperfect.
imperfect. There's not really a standard error of measurement that's available on that test. It's a question and answer test as to, questions like, can he buy his own food at McDonald's? Is he able to read the menu, or does he have to look at a picture in order to order food? So this is objective information that has to come from someone who knows him. So
Yes, sir. That you have to accept as true, right?
Yes, we have to make the determination that the respondent is first knows a person well enough to complete the test. And
So
then,
if she tells you that he had trouble ordering at McDonald's, you have to accept that that's true, right?
no, I'm able to question her about it after the administration of the test if I have a concern.
Okay.
And so, like I said, he was a very good respondent, and I think the validity of her ratings of Mr. Parker are evidenced by the variability, where we see that score of 81, which is well outside of the intellectually disabled range in the social area.
Assuming what she's telling you, you accept as true.
That's correct. And I have to make that clinical judgment as a professional. And it is my professional opinion that her scores are valid.
Okay. And then the third criteria, the last one, that just deals with the history, and you glean that from school records, true?
Yes, I did.
And you are aware, obviously, as you saw the records, he never went to school after 10th grade, right?
I believe it was 11th grade when he was 19, he stopped going to school.
Okay. And those school records that you looked at, according to you, affirm what you have found in accord with the first 2 criteria.
Yeah, and what made this much easier is that there were several psychological reports included in the school records. So we have information about his reevaluations as well. And so that provided a lot of information to confirm that he did have an intellectual disability. However, that was a basis of my opinion.
All right, Your Honor, I have nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skinner. Redirect, Mr. Chipperfield.
No question.
All right, may Dr. Taub be excused? Doctor, thank you for your time and testimony. You are excused. You're welcome to stick around if you'd like. If you do, please mute your microphone.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Chipperfield? Very well. Any other witnesses, Mr. Skinner? All right, so my understanding is that the council has no objection to me listening to this 911 call in chambers. All right, so what we'll do is it's now 4:03. We're going to be in recess till 4:25 to allow me to give the court staff a break as well as listen to the 911 call. All right, we're in recess till 4:25.
Make sure everything's turned off.
No, we didn't. You don't. Yes, I do. It's okay, Chrissy. It's okay. I'm trying my best to get with you, but I can't get along with you. Because you don't, this is nothing, nothing, just nothing, and go get your child, okay? I'm just trying to let you know. Well, what you could have said for Vegas instead of. That's all I was wondering about.
This is a mistake.
Okay. Oh, yeah, sure. But it's not really, yeah. I'm not into that. Call me later.
Yeah, she got here. That's it.
Yeah, I asked him before.
Okay. For whatever. Do they want me to? Yes. And I said, well, you don't. Would you mind making the introduction? Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, now we do it. You filming us while we're talking?
No, no.
Well, they told us that somebody called and said we were live when we were saying we were talking.
No, I've been off since they asked me, oh, yeah. They said, they said on TV. I don't know how. I don't either.
Oh, yeah, I'm living the dream. And you're not used to it.
These guys taking care of you.
Here, oh.
I would come in here.
I see it, that more work comes together. The rest of it.
Never seen. No. Saw him in the back of the room. Looks like they're doing phone stuff. I was getting ready to jack him up. If you look at him, I can do that. Get out of my way.
Yeah, that's a big problem. It's not so much. I don't feel that. Oh. Be done, boys. Yes, I'm ready to go. I didn't know if I could leave it in your lobby. Oh. I just figured he'd been here long. I guess not. Oh, man.
Okay, let the record reflect that I've listened to the 911 tape in its entirety.
Your Honor, I did not neglect to ask in the presence of the court. Parker wanted to address the court.
Okay, Mr. Parker, you want to step up to the microphone, sir? Now, let me explain to you two things. So you have the right to testify on your own behalf at this sentencing proceeding. You can testify under oath. I'll put you under oath, and you can testify. Mr. Chipperfield can ask you questions, and Mr. Skinner can cross-examine you like you've seen him do with the other witnesses. Or you can just, if you would like to give me an unsworn statement, it's called allocution, but it's you don't really need to know that. It's just something you want to say to me. Would you like to just say something to me, or do you want to testify under oath? Okay, now what I need you to do is, though, I need you to step up right to the microphone and speak up nice and loud for me, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say I'm sorry for what I done. It was a bad thing, and I wish I can bring the person back, but I can't. I wish that I can make a lot of things that happen that I can't let happen now. That's all I have. And just say I'm sorry that this happened to this person.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Skinner, I'll hear argument on sentencing.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. On August 3rd, 2021, Caroline Schollaert lost her life. She lost her life for doing everything right. She worked for the Coast Guard. She has a tremendous family. Engaged, had a home, and she was going to work that day. 5:32 a.m., the defendant, on the other hand, made horrible decisions. We heard today that there's some intellectual disability going on in his life. He has some impulse control problems. That's not what his actions showed on August 3rd, 2021. He was able to get a gun that day, as he told the detectives in his interview later. He brought a bag with him. He was walking around in a neighborhood in a black driveway, dark, at 5:30 in the morning, pulling on a car handle. He lied when confronted about his name when Caroline came out and got on 911. He calls himself by the name Lucifer as a lie. He lied about, I live on the other street over there, trying to get away. He wiggled from the side of the car, which was pinned up against the garage. He wiggled his way toward the garage to conceal himself from her. All over, as the court has now heard with its own ears, a 3 or 4 minute dialogue between Caroline Schollaert and the defendant. All he kept trying to do was get away. Not abruptly, not in a panic, as we hear the experts sort of attribute his behavior to intellectual disability and impulse control problems. Well, he didn't have any problem going out that night, pulling on that car door, picking the right time when everyone's in bed, picking the time of night where it's dark, picking the time of a driveway, which is way in the back of the home, which was also dark, carrying a bag nonchalantly over his shoulders, goes straight to the car, pulls on that car handle. Caroline Schollaert spotted him and did what she knew to do. She immediately called 911. Again, a young lady who's got everything going on in her life right, calls law enforcement for help. The defendant is trying to hide in bushes, trying to wiggle his way toward bushes at the front end of that garage where the car was. And he pulls out the gun he had. He fired it. He struck Caroline Schollaert just above her heart, killing her. After the murder, for 7 days, this defendant did nothing to do anything to assist in the investigation. He did walk into the police memorial building on August 10, exactly 7 days after this incident, and turned himself in. He spent 41 minutes in that interview with a story in his mind that he laid out for Detective Abbott and his partner, Detective Saunders, who very patiently and methodically just talked to him. There's no impulse control, no impulse problems in that interview room. Lie after lie after lie. I wasn't there. Quote, Your Honor, quote from that interview. I know I'm not guilty. That's 32 minutes into the interview. To the detective, quote, that dude on the camera doesn't even look like me, end quote. Still trying to wiggle his way out of accountability for taking the life of a young lady just doing everything right. It took 41 minutes of repeated lies to the detectives before he finally says, yeah, I did this. But Your Honor, even more telling, and more telling specifically about the mitigation being presented to this court, more telling is what he said after he admits. At the 1 hour and 59 minute mark, which was exactly 16 minutes after he makes his first admission, his question to the detective was this: how many years am I going to get for this? In fact, he asked it twice. He asked it at the 1 hour and 59 minute mark, and he asked it about 30 minutes later, almost an hour and a half into the interview. How many years am I going to get for this? Is what's on his mind. Today, he says he's sorry. That's not what he said to the detectives. In fact, the detectives just wanted to know why. You're out pulling on a car handle in the middle of the night and burglarizing this car. Why'd you have to shoot her? Why? Why? Says Detective Abbott to the defendant. He gave two answers, Your Honor. Number one, well, she had a gun. Well, Your Honor, the answer to that is she had a gun on him for 3 or 4 minutes. If he had such an impulse control problems, as soon as she walked out and held that gun up on him, he would have fired quickly. He was processing this, which shows what was presented to you today, Your Honor. I would ask the court to hold that with a suspect eye. Is he slow? Yes. Does he have some issues? Yes. But it does not justify nor excuse what he did to Caroline Schollaert. So the detective pushed him in that interview, and he says, well, yeah, but just because she had a gun, she was aiming it at you to hold you there for the police. The court's heard this conversation on 911. So he says to the detective 7 days later, well, quote, I didn't want to get into any trouble, end quote. Worried about himself in that interview room. How many years am I going to get? How many years am I going to get, detective? What am I looking at? And I didn't want to get in any trouble. This is a man who was processing very clearly what was happening to him as he made his admission to the detectives. After the murder, we also see a continuing effort to conceal what he'd done. He ran through yards as witnesses called 911 and said, motion lights are coming on in my backyard, 2 houses down. He ditched a bag. Comes in with that story, lying about being chased by some hackers, he says, of 4 people chasing him. That's why he was running through that neighborhood. I was just out. He tells me, I was chased by these 4 guys. They were after me. I just ran. Lie. For 41 minutes. There are no impulse control issues going on there, Your Honor. He knew exactly what he was doing. He concealed it for 7 days. But once the detective sat in that interview room for 41 minutes, let him tell his story and says, wait, we're just going to go ahead and tell you, it's all on video. She's on the phone, sir. We see what happens. Only then does he admit what he had done. Your Honor, our argument is simple. The defendant has committed 2 extremely serious offenses in the state of Florida. And as the court is well aware, this is a very wise court I am speaking to. And I know the court has worked extensively in the criminal justice system. But there's a reminder we all need every now and then. And I know I need to reiterate it here today. Florida State Statute 921.002, subsection 1, subsection B says this: the primary purpose of sentencing is to punish the offender. And the statute just below that says the following: the penalty imposed by the court is commensurate with the severity of the primary offense and the circumstances surrounding the primary offense. Well, this primary offense is murder in the 2nd degree, punishable up to life in prison with a minimum mandatory of 25 years up to life in prison. Count 2 alone, Your Honor, armed burglary is a first PBL, also punishable by life in prison. That is incredibly severe offenses that the court most certainly could consider, just simply the severity of those. And then when you consider all these circumstances, his actions both before and after he took the life of someone totally innocent. This is not someone out buying drugs. This is not 2 gang members, Your Honor. This is an innocent young lady living her life and living it gloriously, perfectly, and wonderfully with an incredible family, getting up, going to work, and serving our great country. The first words out of Caroline Schollaert's mouth to the defendant is indicative of what we heard her mother and father come up here and say in these victim impact statements. The first words, the court, I know the court just listened to it, the first words to him from her during this exchange, when she came out of that house and walked up to him on that driveway, she said, "Hey, can I help you?" That's who Caroline Schollaert was. He chose, the defendant chose, while she tried to just hold him there for police to arrive, to escalate this to murder. He should be punished for that. He should be punished severely for that. He should be punished in accordance with Florida law for that. He should be punished because of his actions. He should be punished because of the severity of these offenses. These actions of him both before and after show that he deserves exactly what the Department of Corrections represented in the PSI, which is life. Exactly what that great family just stood up here and said, which is the maximum penalty. And the state of Florida now comes and says he ought to receive, as a recommended sentence to this court, life in prison, both counts consecutive, with both counts receiving the life minimum mandatory imposed as to each.
Mr. Skinner,
Yes, Your Honor.
I think that I don't have the discretion to impose these consecutively
And if the court does not, the state
Because-
is accepting of that.
because of the case law from the Supreme Court that says about when you impose the minimum mandatories, which this course requires, that unless you have multiple victims, then the court doesn't have the discretion to impose these sentences
If
consecutively.
the
At least
court runs
that's
them
my,
concurrent, you won't get an objection from.
that's my view of the law. And of course, I'm going to follow the law.
Of course, Your Honor. In closing, I would say this, the guidelines alone, setting aside Min-Man's score well or close to almost a quarter of a century of points, 23.75 years in points. That's absent the 25 to life Min-Man. Obviously, with the minimum mandatory of 25 to life on each count, it elevates those. So the bare minimum as to each count is 25 years. Clearly, the guidelines, clearly with Florida law, clearly with the severity of these offenses, the state is asking this court to impose a life sentence and sentence him accordingly. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Right. And I'm gonna check on that because I'm not 100% certain as we speak of whether that only applies when there's only a discharge, but I'm going to check on that just to see what my legal options are. Mr. Chipperfield?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Skinner.
Colonel, let me first clear up a couple of disputes. I think about the facts. I don't read the pre-sentence investigation as recommending a life sentence. What's recommended at page 8, this officer respectfully recommends the defendant be sentenced to a minimum of 25 years to a term of life in a Florida state prison. I think
And I've
that's
read
just really stating it's got to be a sentence of 25 up to life. Regardless of that, the court, of course, determines the sentence, and we know it's got to be at least 25 years under his plea. The other thing I wanted to clear up was the interrogation. I haven't measured the minutes during which Mr. Parker lied, but there's no dispute that he did tell a lie. He told a rather simple lie that he was running away from 4 people, that he didn't commit the crime. But as soon as he was confronted with what the detectives had, he told the truth. And the detectives said, long after he had confessed, and they're still talking to him, detective says, I think it says a lot about you and a lot about your character that you come in, and even knowing that you're in trouble, that you still come in and give the truth. I think it will mean at least something to her parents. I can tell you there's been plenty of times that I've sat across and talked to someone and they don't care about what they did, but I can tell that you really do feel bad about it. I can tell that it's been weighing on you. Even now, you can see it's like a weight come off your shoulders. You know you're still in trouble, but just being able to get it out, it seems like a weight's come off of your shoulders. And on the very next page, the defendant shows that he's not just thinking about himself. He says, is anybody going to get in trouble other than me? The detective says, I don't know. We're still doing everything. Just because we're talking to you, we're not done. We're still doing other stuff. Do you think anyone else should get in trouble besides you? And he says, no, that's why I asked this. Nobody did anything wrong. So he wasn't just thinking about himself. Your Honor, this is such a sad case for the Schollaert's family and the friends, and I can't imagine their pain. And I think there's always a tendency to believe that the person who committed such a senseless murder is a monster. But he is, in fact, a brain damaged, intellectually disabled young man who, in addition, has led a life filled with the kind of trauma that we wouldn't wish on anybody. From the day he was born prematurely to a 14-year-old girl who was beaten in the stomach and gave birth the next day, he has led a rough life. By the time he was 7, his mother became a drug addict. She was placed on felony probation, which she violated, and went into custody. She later lost custody of her children. His 17-year-old father was in and out of felony trouble until he finally went to prison for 12 years for manslaughter and possession of firearm by a convicted felon when Tyree was 7 years old. Tyree did kindergarten 3 times. He was referred for ESE classes in either the 3rd year of kindergarten or in 1st grade. He was diagnosed with ADHD and serious emotional problems and stayed in special classes throughout school. He was taken away from his mother at age 7 after negligent care. He was given to his grandmother, and he was taken away from her at age 11 after his uncle, who lived with the grandmother, physically and sexually abused him. The uncle was prosecuted and eventually sent to prison. Tyree was in 2 different foster homes. Notably, his first foster mother told the DCF workers that Tyree has a kind heart and truly wants to be nice, but something going on inside of him gets in the way. At age 15, he suffered very serious injuries in a go-kart accident and has metal rods in several places in his body as a result of that. He had been receiving Social Security disability, but it lapsed when he was 16 years old after his mother had a stroke and was unable to keep up with the paperwork that was required to continue the benefits. After that, he couldn't afford the medication that he should have been taking and that he had been taking when he was under the care of Daniel Kidd. He worked at low-paying jobs, and the job choices were limited, and he had to rely on others to help him get the jobs. The jobs that we have been able to find out about were that he held up a sign outside a tax preparer's business. He cut grass. He helped his father in a car detail business. And then his last job, just 4 months before his arrest in this case, he lost a job digging trenches for cable. He lost the job because he was arrested for a domestic battery that was dropped, but he spent about 10 days in jail and could not find another job after that. That was just 4 months before this. We know, based on the studies that have been done about trauma, that trauma affects brain and brain development and behavior. And the only adverse childhood experience he doesn't have is the one about parents being divorced because his parents were never married. So he's got the trauma problem. Then he's got the IQ problem. We put on probably one of the most qualified experts in the state of Florida who tested his IQ, and there's no reason to suspect that his IQ is anything different than 65 plus or minus the margin of error. Dr. Kropp's abbreviated test came up with a 66. He was tested 3 different times in school. He got a 55. He got a 72 on a test that was outdated, and when adjusted was right around 70. He got a 74 on another test that was outdated, and when adjusted for the Flynn effect was right around 70. So his score is certainly somewhere in the high 60s or maybe possibly up to 70. The point of intellectual disability is not being made just by us. It was made by the United States Supreme Court. In Atkins versus Virginia, the United States Supreme Court outlawed the death penalty for people with intellectual disability. Of course, we're not talking about the death penalty here, but the statements made in that opinion apply here. The court stated mentally retarded persons frequently know the difference between right and wrong and are competent to stand trial. Because of their impairments, however, by definition, they have diminished capacities to understand and process information, to communicate, to abstract from mistakes and learn from experience, to engage in logical reasoning, to control impulses, and to understand the reactions of others. There is no evidence that they are more likely to engage in criminal conduct than others, but there is abundant evidence that they often act on impulse rather than pursuant to a premeditated plan. Their deficiencies do not warrant an exemption from criminal sanctions, but they do diminish their personal culpability. In addition to the intellectual disability problem, we also have his age, and the court is familiar with the research that says that the human brain does not generally mature until the mid-20s, and Mr. Parker was 22 years old when this occurred. Your Honor, he has the only criminal record that Tyree Parker had was a domestic battery arrest where a girlfriend made claims against him and the charges were dropped. He doesn't have any other involvement in the criminal justice system, either adult or juvenile. As I said, this is a very, very sad case. There's no doubt that Ms. Schollaert was a special person. Her death is a very sad loss to her family, her friends, and the entire community, and Mr. Parker must pay a high price for that. But I think the evidence shows that he didn't set out that morning to hurt anyone. He set out to test the handles on car doors and get what he could out of the cars. He ran and fired the gun after being surprised in the act of burglarizing a car and having a gun pointed at him. Because of his age, his disabilities, and all the problems in his life and his IQ, making decisions under pressure was certainly not his strength, and he made a horrible decision. To his credit, he did turn himself in. He did lie to the police, but he also then did tell the truth when he was confronted with the lie. I would suggest that the court should consider a sentence of a long term of years. Of course, it has to be at least 25 because of the mandatory minimum, followed by probation, and give this young man a chance to prove that he knows how to act in society. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Parker, come on up here with your lawyer. Give me 1 minute. So I'm sorry, this is going to be hard to hear, but listening to this and listening to this young lady die was one of the most chilling things I've ever heard. And I'm old and I've heard a lot. I've taken into consideration every single thing that was presented to me during the sentencing hearing, as well as taking judicial notice of the court file. And I'm very aware that my decision here will have an impact on both families. And I know that my decision here will have an impact on Mr. Parker's mom, his dad, his grandfather, his aunt, his cousin. I understand that. And, but as Mr. Skinner pointed out, one of the main reasons for it, or the main reason, is punishment. And the other ones besides deterrence is protection of the public. And so after considering all the evidence that has been presented here to me, including all the mitigation evidence that was presented to me, and let me say that I am not going to take into consideration the recommendation of the probation officer in the PSI, nor am I going to taken in consideration the recommendation from anyone who opined of what sentence I should impose. I'm going to take victim impact evidence for the uniqueness of the individual and the loss of her to her family. So as to count 1 and count 2, I'm going to adjudicate you guilty. I'm going to sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with a minimum mandatory of life in prison. I'm going to run the sentences in counts 1 and 2 concurrently with each other. I'm going to give you 464 days of credit against each of your sentences. And I'm going to impose normal court costs. $518 in court costs plus $150 public defender lien, which I'll reduce to a civil judgment. You have 30 days to file a notice of appeal if you believe I've imposed an illegal sentence. And if you cannot afford an attorney for purposes of appeal, I'll appoint one for you. So the minimum mandatory is applied to both counts, life sentence without the possibility of parole, with a life minimum mandatory on each of the 2 counts to run concurrent. Anything else from either side?
No, Your Honor, and thank you.
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. We are in recess. Ms. Harrison, I'm gonna just put life on the judgment sentence, just life. And Mr. Chipperfield, I just want to let you know, I'm just making sure that the judgment sentence is going to say life in prison. Parole, there's no parole in Florida, but the sentence is actually life with the minimum mandatory of life.
She developed